refused, but why he didn't volunteer to come forward, why he was unwilling to share his information, why it was even necessary to subpoena him. After all, so many others did their constitutional duty. Republican Speaker in Arizona, Rusty Bowers.
Well, folks, let me tell you, things got heated on Capitol Hill. We're talking about the January 6th investigation, a day that will forever be etched in American history. And at the center of this political showdown were two prominent figures, Congressman Adam Schiff and Congressman Jim Jordan. Now Schiff, you know him, the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, a man who doesn't mince words. And then there's Jordan, a staunch ally of former President Trump, known for his fiery rhetoric and, well, let's just say, unique interrogation style. The January 6th investigation, you see, was all about getting to the bottom of what happened that fateful day when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building. It was chaos, folks, pure chaos. And Schiff, he was determined to uncover the truth, to hold those responsible accountable, no matter how high up the ladder they might be. But Jordan, well, he seemed to have a different view. He saw the investigation as a witch hunt, a partisan attempt to smear Trump and his supporters. Now, as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Jordan wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't just some guy with a front row seat to history. No, Jordan was...
It's back. Gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff is recognized. Then we'll go to Mr. Ivey.
Mr. Chairman, once again, we hear an effort to reinvent January 6th, this time as people expressing peacefully their disagreements with the government. January 6th was not a peaceful expression of differences with the government. It was a massive, violent attack on the Capitol with the object of overturning a free and fair election. Mr. Jordan cut off debate on my amendment to hold him in contempt, so we couldn't discuss what his role was, why he was subpoenaed, and whether he should be held to the same standard as a private citizen. And while he said quite erroneously that he was not required to testify, either because he took issue with the object of the investigation or because the speech and debate clause, as Representative Lofgren pointed out, that does not apply to subpoenaing a member of this body. Let's remember who did step forward, and let's ask ourselves not why he was compelled and refused, but why he didn't volunteer to come forward, why he was unwilling to share his information, why it was even necessary to subpoena him. After all, so many others did their constitutional duty. Republican Speaker in Arizona, Rusty Bowers, talked about how he was compelled by his oath, by his faith, by the Constitution.
Leading up to January 6th, he had spoken to Trump numerous times, including on the day of the insurrection itself. And so, naturally, Schiff and his fellow investigators wanted to hear what Jordan had to say. They wanted to know what he knew, what he had discussed with Trump, what role he might have played in the events of that day. But there was just one problem, a big one. Jordan, he didn't want to talk. That's right, folks. Jim Jordan, the man who never seems to miss an opportunity to speak his mind, suddenly went silent. When the committee investigating the January 6th insurrection issued a subpoena demanding his testimony, Jordan refused to comply. He claimed it was all a political stunt, a way to silence him and other Trump supporters. But Schiff, he wasn't buying it. He knew that Jordan's refusal to testify spoke volumes. It was like a child refusing to show his parents what he was hiding behind his back. You know something's up, but you can't quite put your finger on it. See, Jordan wasn't the only one who had been called to testify before the committee. Numerous officials, both Democrats and Republicans, had answered the call to duty. People like Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, who had resisted Trump's pressure to overturn the election results, he testified. Rusty Bowers, the Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, who had also refused to go along with Trump's schemes, he testified too. These were men of integrity, men who understood the importance of upholding the Constitution, even when it meant standing up to their own party. But Jordan, he seemed to think he was above the law, or at least above congressional subpoenas. He seemed to believe that the rules did
to refuse the former president's entreaties to overturn the election. And he showed his devotion to our country and the Constitution by coming and testifying. Jim Jordan would not. Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, did his constitutional duty both to protect the vote in Georgia, to ignore the former president's demands that he find 11,780 votes that didn't exist, but also to come and testify, to share with the country what he knew, but not Jim Jordan. Cassidy Hutchinson, a staff member at the White House, showed extraordinary courage to come forward, showed her devotion to her country and Constitution, and came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. Capitol Police officers who were beaten and gouged that day, they came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. White House counsel, Republican White House counsel, came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. And lest we forget why the committee wanted Jim Jordan, let's look at our referral to the Ethics Committee over his failure to come forward for guide as to why we wanted his testimony. Representative Jordan was a significant player in President Trump's efforts, we wrote. He participated in numerous post-election meetings in which senior White House officials, Rudy Giuliani and others, discussed strategies for challenging the election. Chief among them claims that the election had been tainted by fraud. On January 2nd, 2021, Representative Jordan led a conference call in which he, President Trump, and other members of Congress discussed strategies for delaying the January 6th joint session. During that call, the group also discussed issuing social media posts encouraging President Trump's supporters to march to the Capitol on January 6th.
Where Schiff's criticism of Jordan's hypocrisy really comes into play. See, Jordan, in his role as a member of Congress, had been all too eager to hold others accountable, often through the use of congressional subpoenas. He had been a vocal critic of the Biden administration, demanding investigations into Hunter Biden's business dealings and the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. But when it came to his own potential involvement in the events of January 6th, well, suddenly Jordan wasn't so keen on transparency and accountability. It was a classic case of do as I say, not as I do. Schiff called Jordan out on this blatant double standard, pointing out that no one, not even a member of Congress, is above the law. He argued that if Jordan had nothing to hide, then he should have been more than happy to testify before the committee and clear his name. But by refusing to cooperate, Jordan was essentially pleading the fifth, even though he hadn't been charged with a crime. It was a tacit admission that he had something to hide, that he knew his actions leading up to January 6th wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. And this, folks, goes beyond just Jordan.
Later, President Trump and Representative Jordan spoke by phone for 18 minutes. Yes, we wanted him to come testify about what he discussed with President Trump for 18 minutes. And no, Jim Jordan has never told this body why he was unwilling to tell the country about that conversation in the run-up to a violent attack on the U.S. Capitol. Or why he spoke with White House staff about, as we wrote, the prospect of presidential pardons for members of Congress. He was unwilling to say why he thought pardons for members of Congress might be necessary. And today, he's unwilling to tell us why there should be a different standard for a member of Congress who is subpoenaed than for a private citizen, and why the standard for a private citizen should be so much higher. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle say that's not a germane question. We love to hide behind germaneness when we really don't want to answer the root of the matter. And the root of the matter is, why is Hunter Biden's failure to appear worthy of a criminal contempt, but the chairman of the Judiciary Committee's unwillingness to comply with a congressional subpoena gets nothing more than a shrug? That's really the question before this committee today. And so far, there is no answer. I yield back.
Gentlemen, yield.
Or the lack thereof in our government. When elected officials believe they are above the law, when they refuse to be held accountable for their actions, it erodes public trust in our institutions. It creates a sense that there are two sets of rules, one for the powerful and one for everyone else. Schiff, in his criticisms of Jordan, was really making a plea for a return to a government of laws, a government where everyone is held accountable for their actions, regardless of their political affiliation or position of power. He understood that the events of January 6th were not just about a mob of angry protesters, they were about an assault on our democracy, an attempt to overturn the will of the people. And he knew that if America was going to heal from this wound, it needed to hold those responsible accountable, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Jordan's refusal to testify before the January 6th committee was a disservice to the American people, a betrayal of his oath of office. It was a clear example of how partisan politics has poisoned our government, making it increasingly difficult to find common ground and address the challenges facing our nation. Schiff, in his condemnation of Jordan's actions, reminded us that our elected officials have a duty to uphold the Constitution, to serve the people, and to be held accountable for their actions. And he made it clear that he would not back down from that fight, no matter the cost.